Hi friends, this is Gina. Over the past few weeks in June 2020, a lot has happened. A social justice movement has finally taken some recognition in our world, which is a fight our brothers and sisters of color have been having for a long time, right under our noses. My journey over these past few weeks has been mainly focused on offering support, educating myself as much as possible, and sharing the mic with others around Black Lives Matter. I used to be someone who didn't share my political views online because I felt like I lived my life full of kindness and without racism. But I quickly learned that that's the majority of what white people are doing, and it's not helpful. Calling out racism in my everyday life, holding those accountable, spreading awareness about racism, and practicing anti-racist activities regularly, even when this quote-unquote trend is over in the media, is what I have been focusing on. I, like many white people, have been scared to share my thoughts and feelings for fear of judgment and my own shame coming to the surface. In the blackout week, I took some reflection time and thought about how I wanted to show up as an advocate for health and for my community. What was my role in this world and in this movement? As a health coach, I help women to not be ashamed of who they are, which directly relates to a feeling that Black individuals are having right now. I also discourage judgment within my clients' hearts towards themselves and show them that fostering a self-loving relationship is so important. Because this is my passion around helping women love themselves fully, I decided to take this role within the Black Lives Matter movement. Black oppression in a white male-dominated world must not be tolerated anymore. I wanted to use my platform to share others' stories and how they are being affected, with hope to inspire people, especially the Black community, to not be ashamed of themselves. Expressing our feelings and emotions through joyful and difficult times is crucial for our mental well-being, and I encourage us all to be brave during this time. I hope that our conversations today can inspire, educate, and motivate you towards change. Enjoy this interview as part of a series that I'll be doing to offer my support through this important time in our history. Hi, everybody. I have here Kristen Jeter. She is one of my dear friends that I've had for a very long time. We've just rekindled our friendship back after not speaking for a long time, but we went to our performing school together at AMDA, New York City, and I am so excited to chat with her today.
Yeah, hey Gina, it's good to be here with you. Yeah, and no, of course, no lack of love or anything. You were on a boat and I was on the road, and
yes, I know. I feel like I
on.
didn't keep in contact with many people because it was so difficult.
Yeah, that's difficult. You had to go get those experiences. We understand 100%. But the thing that I always say is that your good friends always pick up where you leave off. And I feel like we've been able to do that just from our earlier conversation and, talking to each other over social media and stuff like that. If you're real friends,
so true.
Then you understand, and you can keep being real friends.
It's so true. Yeah. I feel like no time has passed. Like we still have the same energies and we can connect so deeply.
Yeah, so Gina and I went to AMDA together, the American Musical and Dramatic Academy. So we met when we were 18. That was many moons ago now.
Whoa. I can't even believe that it was over 10 years ago. Can you?
Yeah. Well, I wasn't going to say it, but you had.
I mean, most people know that I'm in my 30s now, so
it's true.
There's no secrets here.
There's no denying it. I mean, I feel like the both of us still play younger roles.
Oh my God.
It's still a thing.
I know. I don't know if you're going to get to see Kristen's beautiful face in this, but we both look very young.
Yeah.
So
it's still working out. The last role that I played here in Atlanta was a 15-year-old. So
I love that. I love that. I know. I really want to get into voiceover work. And I have a feeling I'm a bit scratchy and very sultry this morning, but most of the time I'm really high pitched, and I would love to do cartoon voiceover.
Right.
It's so fun.
I was talking to a friend last night. I think we're going to see a lot of animation pop up because it's what people can do. That's what led me to start to want to do voiceover. Is I was listening to this podcast, the storytelling podcast called Two Princes, and it had a bunch of actors that you would recognize, and I was like, oh, this is where it's going. This is where people are. This is where the storytellers are going.
Oh yeah, for sure. We're going to see more of that. Well, I'm so glad you're here. I've done a few of these interviews with a few of my other friends, and it was so powerful and just so beautiful to hear their story around the Black Lives Matter movement. And I'm just so interested and so curious to see what information and what perspective you have for the listeners. So I'd love to start with the question of, what has been the impact of this movement on you, knowing like your background and what you've experienced in your life? What has been the impact for you, and how do you feel about this movement?
Wow, yeah, that's a big one. No, that's okay. Well, I'm an African American female who grew up in the metro Atlanta area, which at one point was the capital of the Confederacy. So I think we should start there. Let's see, until 2003, the Confederate flag was part of the Georgia flag. There was this circle emblem, but then there was the Confederate flag there, but also it used to fly around when we were in high school, say 03 to 07. I had a neighbor down the street who flew the just plain old South Will Rise Again flag. And, some people think that they're claiming Southern heritage, but it's really oblivious, and sometimes not oblivious. Sometimes it's just like a blatant hurt, and it feels like a stab and a dig to people who had to overcome such a situation. So that's kind of been baked into my existence as to where I come from. I grew up in the suburbs of Atlanta, and when I was in elementary school, I went to a predominantly white elementary school, and I think I started to learn then that I was different. Because my family's Black, so I didn't know anything about it. My mother is a very fair-skinned Black woman, like not exactly white passing. She is very light skinned, but the futurism is also a thing that we have to get into as well. And she's got some pretty Black features, but she had this feeling of kind of living in between worlds a little bit. Black people assumed that she had some kind of privilege because of her skin, but white people also ostracized her for not being white. So that's where she came from. And so she didn't really put too much of an emphasis on our Blackness. So that's not something that I really realized was a thing until I got into elementary school, and I noticed that girls' hair was different, and even most of their names were different. My first name is Kristen, but when I was in elementary school, I wanted people to call me Christy because I was surrounded by Courtneys and Kellys and Caseys, and
those names were really popular at that time.
They were, yeah. That, and I feel like Amanda was a name that was around a lot. But so let's see. So then when I got into middle school was when I got into a school that was more diverse. The elementary school that I went to was also very small. And so I realized as I went to a bigger middle school, kind of educational disparities as well, when I was going to school with more Black people who didn't seem to have gotten like the same amount of education that I did when I was in elementary school. And then there was this kind of cultural divide because I was a person who could interact with other white people or other cultures it seemed like I was ostracized a little bit in that way, and had to navigate through that. But I was glad for that time, and I found like some of the greatest friends that I have, including the guy who is my roommate right now, whose kids are my god kids. But it was yeah, that was really interesting. And goodness, I don't know, it's like it's Blackness is something that Black people have to deal with all the time, so it's hard to even know where to start, because it really is just baked into the fabric of our identity. And I think it's something that we have to deal with, I think, more than white people have to deal with. Yeah, I don't imagine that white people think this much about being white as Black people have to think about being
Absolutely
Black.
not. And I think that was something that really hit me when I was doing my research and just speaking to other people, is like, when on a daily basis do you have to like always be aware that just the way that you look is affecting everything about your life, like you know, what career you can have, how people portray you, how people speak to you, the actions that are happening to you. And if I had to think about that every day, about what I looked like, I think like not only women in general in this age have like low self-worth and low self-image, which is something I help women with in my coaching, but to know that it's something that you can't physically change is devastating. Right. So like I can't even imagine.
Or you try to change whatever it is that you can change. I had a lot of well, not so much, but there was a big pressure to assimilate as much as you could physically in order to just be around in the world. We'll take hair, for example. I have very tight coils. I think I'm in the 4 variety. I don't know which one, maybe B or C or something.
Ooh, what does this mean? Tell me.
Oh, it's a measurement of your curl pattern. It's a measurement of how curly your hair is.
Is this something like your natural curls? Is that what you mean?
Yes. Yeah, your natural curls, just the way your hair grows out.
Wow.
So that you can so that you can try to figure out how to manage your hair, because now we're finding out, as people are wearing their curls, that you have to consider porosity, you know, how absorbent your hair is to moisture. Our scalp doesn't produce its own oils, so we add those in, but also add moisturizer into the actual hair, like a lot of oils. So knowing how your hair behaves basically is that. So I think it goes from 1 to 4D. There might be A, B, C, D in each category. You can Google it, and it'll have like a strand of hair stretched out representing each curl pattern.
That's amazing. But every day's a school day, honestly.
Yes, but I didn't get to know my curl pattern until 2011. On my 10th birthday, I asked for a relaxer. Before then, my sister had been doing my hair, and she'd do it in like cute little bows and plaits and stuff like that, you know, with the barrettes on the end, or she would use a hot comb to straighten it. But that was considered being kept, was if your hair was straight. If your hair was curly at all, it was considered nappy. I'm trying to get people to stop using that word. I had to tell my mom too, you can't say that. It's kind of damaging. You know, now we say things like kinky curly just to accept the way that your hair is. But, you know, people would be passed over for jobs, for opportunities. People would be underestimated if you were wearing a style of hair that just naturally reflected who you are culturally. And I'm so glad that we're changing things like that. But yeah, so on my 10th birthday, I wanted to have hair that was naturally straight. So partially so my sister wouldn't have to, not naturally, but chemically straightened, so that my sister wouldn't have to do my hair anymore. And so that I could just fit in, so I could present as much length as possible in my hair. It's just things like little things like that, or you know, tweezing your eyebrows, or even Gina, making sure that you don't get too dark in the summertime. I'm about I'm about a mid-grade. We can also talk about what are the scales of complexion, of course, because like there's so many shades that come in this Black experience. So we'll call me, I float between like caramel and toffee, but I know that I had lots of friends who had darker skin complexions than me, who in the summertime didn't even want to enjoy the same things that other people did because they're thinking about their skin complexion. They, if someone was, say, chocolate or dark chocolate, they didn't want to get any darker because they didn't want to be, they didn't want to be put into
treated differently, probably
another subcategory. They didn't want to be knocked further down on the totem pole.
That's so crazy. Like when I think about that, obviously, like I'm a pasty, like pink undertoned,
peaches and cream,
and I have all these little freckles. And when I think about going in the sun and enjoying the sun, like I have other worries of like being burnt and being, sun damaged, or getting wrinkles or whatever, like the privileged thoughts, but never in my life would I would have thought that other people have these worries of like, if I get in the sun and get darker and affect my skin, like that is something that affects how people treat me. And that is shocking.
Or even how we have treated each other too, as far as beauty standards, or getting people in your own community to like you romantically. That's a thing too. Colorism exists because lighter skin is supposed to be closer to whiteness, or it's perceived that way, or it gets mixed up and screwed up and comes out that way. And so there's this thing where there were some men who only dated lighter skinned women, but it was like, what about the rest of these people who are wonderful people but can't do anything about the way that they look? So there's that layer to it too.
Do you this question came up in my mind when you were speaking, because I coach women on body image and self-image, and I've done a lot of like research and looking into this particular topic. And a lot of it has to do with consumption of our media and the cultural images that we are given on a daily basis. And that really affects people. And do you feel like Black people have been represented?
Herbal Essence hair, just like everybody else wanted Herbal Essence hair. Representation is so important. It wasn't until Barack Obama's presidency, my nephew at the time, my youngest nephew, Barack Obama was the only president that he had ever known. So he never grew up in a world where people were saying that Black men couldn't hold the highest office in this land. And so there's a different kind of, there is no glass ceiling that he sees, or he can't see, a roof on how high he can go, because we have now been represented in that way. And it makes such a difference, how you're seen, how you're able to be seen. I mean, especially in Hollywood, it dates back to black and white movies, where the only parts for men and women of color were either, boogeymen or lowlifes or maids. And that was kind of a representation in some parts of society, but there were also lots of people who were banding together and making their own and establishing their own wealth and traditions and culture that wasn't always subservient, but that's what we got to see, and that's also what your community got to see. And so those images are just imprinting. I've been rereading Blink by Malcolm Gladwell, and it just talks about that implicit bias and how hard it is to shake it, and how it happens in milliseconds. And so it takes a lot of unlearning, and those images definitely repeated over and over again just warp that data field.
I guess what specifically, what department or what part of our culture would you like to see the most representation of an accurate depiction of people of color? That's a really hard question, but just wanted to ask it.
I think it's happening now. I think people everywhere are making art and making change with like the full breadth of their humanity. I think it's about exposure. I think it's about sharing it. I think it's about getting it to across county, party, city lines. Because I traveled with the national tour of the Book of Mormon for about 3 years, and when I was traveling around, I noticed that a lot of this country is still very segregated. People live apart, and yes, we're clannish people, but when you don't have the opportunity to work together, to nurture each other, to play ball together or go to church together, then it's easy to believe what somebody else tells you about someone else. I think that understanding leads to tolerance. That's always been my motto. I always want to know why people are the way they are. And when you do that, you can understand them, and we fear the unknown. And so if you can get to a place where you can know someone better, then the doors open up and the bridges can be built. So I think that there's a lot of platforms, there's a lot of storytellers that are doing their part. I think that's why it's important to share Black stories as much as you can, because the thing about stories that I was thinking about is that not having had representation, it's not like Black people didn't identify with these other stories. I got into musical theater because I used to watch old 50s movie musicals and stuff like that, and and all those are a lot of them are problematic in some spots. I was able to empathize with the humanity of those characters. Like, that's something that we do, but I feel like on the other end, I wonder if when white people see Black stories, they only see it as a Black story. They don't see it as, just someone else's lived experience that maybe I could get something out of by watching as well. I think that's the gap.
I have 3 thoughts about what you said.
Yes.
Let's see if I can remember the third one. The first one that comes to mind is I think in the U.S. compared to the rest of the world, we don't value traveling as much as we should and seeing other cultures. And if there's any listeners that know me, they know that I worked on a cruise ship for 10 years. So right then and there, you're in a melting pot of people from different cultures, from different countries, who look different, who can be in any position. And that's one of the beautiful things that I loved about working at sea, is that it showed me that so many people from different cultures can get along and work together and be kind and be curious. I think we need to always be accessing that place of curiosity when it comes to meeting new people. And because I saw that for so many years and found that it was completely normal. And I got to see other cultures, other countries, experience different languages. Like that was incredibly eye-opening. And it helped me to better understand, like you said, understand other people's perspectives and why people do the things that they do, and really respect that and honor that in them. And the second thought that I had was,
before you move to the second thought, that honestly made me think about on the other hand, people who try to squash that out completely. And I think the weaponizing of stereotypes is something that has happened a lot through history, just telling this one story, telling this one narrative, showing this one caricature, so that you can keep this kind of ignorant masses. You can tell them whatever you want to tell them. But go ahead.
No, exactly. It's so true. And I think as young people, and I think it's so important to get away from your, this sounds terrible, but get away from your family of origin and see the world and see all different kinds of people. And I think it starts with us. It starts with that curious mind and to seek out and really action out those things. Because like you said, you know, if you're kind of in your hometown, staying in the same place for a long time, which a lot of people do, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think it's so important to constantly be seeking out different perspectives from different people, because when you look like a duck and talk like a duck, you are a duck. You know, you will constantly be having the same mindsets the more that you stay in a location, because you're not broadening your perspectives. And in that, I think I'm reading a lot. Have you read Brené Brown? I am obsessed with her.
I've watched her TED Talk on vulnerability, but I haven't read any of her work yet.
Holy moly. She talks a lot about vulnerability, but her book I'm reading right now is called Dare to Lead. A lot of it is about leading other people, but I think it starts with shaping who you are inside. And one of the things she brings up is empathy, and how it's so different from quote unquote sympathy. Sympathy is more being an outsider and feeling sorry for someone in a situation, but not taking on their emotion, not taking energy. And I think that she explains empathy so well, of just being with that person and feeling their situation, not trying to fix it, not trying to like control it, not trying to one up them or disregarding their situation, but really sitting in their emotion and being in it with them. And I think right now we can use so much more empathy, not only for the Black community, but for all of humanity. And when we can hone that skill, I think we can better understand and be with people more on a human level.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. I got nothing else to say about that, you know.
So much learning.
I don't know if it's something that as artists we are more prone to doing, putting ourselves in other people's shoes, but I wish there was a way that we can start to indoctrinate that into how we raise children, but also how we reparent adults. There's so much. I don't think you should give up on people, you know. Yes, the children are showing us the way. Yes, they lead by example. They know, but also adults can remember who they were as children. And I think all of us, you know, for the most part, start out as good human beings who understand what's right and what's wrong.
And I think as children, I heard this story from Dean's grandfather recently, and he's a pastor in the Salvation Army, and he's like one of the most kind, loving people that doesn't understand like why there are people in this world that are white supremacists. And I mean, he understands the culture and the background, but like it's just not something that he resonates with, is those people, obviously. But one of the stories he told me is that there was a white child who had their Black friend knock on the door and asked if they could play. And she said, 1 second, I have to ask my mom. So she went in the kitchen and she said, Mom, can I play with, Sally or whoever?
Mm-hmm.
And her mom was like, oh, yeah, is that your Black friend? And she was like, I don't know. Let me go check. Because children do not see that. They see it, but it's not the first thing they notice.
Yeah, it doesn't. Or, that stuff is learned so quickly. It's like there's a window when you can just accept people for who they are. And even if you do see color, that's fine. I don't think the purpose of the movement is to not see color. I think that we should celebrate our individuality and our cultural heritage as much as we can, especially, Black people are starting to do that as more, and there's always been a Pan-African movement, but that's something that I've been interested lately, just finding roots, looking into other ways that feel like that resonate with me as a Black person who is a descendant of Africa. So I don't want for children to feel like they have to be neutral in that way, but in order to but I just, if they can just not be discriminated against or treated any differently, obviously that would be the goal.
Yeah. And the story resonated with me, but it also made me think about what you just said, which is it's not about seeing no color and no differences. Yeah. It's about accepting those differences and honoring them. And that is why we love other people. That's why you love your partner. It's because they have a different life and they have flaws and they have all these little quirks about them that are not like you. And that's why we accept and honor and love other people, is because of their differences, not because we see them from our perspective as like us. We want them to not be like us, and we need to accept those differences and love those differences.
Yeah, exactly.
So
there is no such thing as like us. Every person is created individually, so you might as well accept the differences. And I wonder if that's something that starts in schools, because I remember this kind of sheep mentality, just keep your head down, have all the same cultural influences, dress pretty similarly to everybody else, and not stand out too much. It seems like kids today are embracing whatever their individuality is more so now. But I think that's something that is learned from our little societies that are created in schools too.
Now, was there anything in your community, in your home, that you felt was a learned behavior that didn't necessarily, I think you touched on it a little bit, you didn't realize that you were different until you went out in the world, until you went to schools. Was there any sort of limitations that were put on you, like you shouldn't do this and you shouldn't do that, and anything like that?
I don't think so, really, other than beauty standards, making sure that I looked neat in some kind of way. My mother used to say, I work too hard for you to look like nobody cares about you. But she was from a press and curl, wash and set era. And so, my mother is just now wearing her natural curls and stuff. And it's so beautiful to see. But she was an accountant in a corporation that changed around her. She worked there for 40 years, and the company changed around her a bunch of times. But she always felt like it was in her best interest to look a certain way, or to not stand out with that kind of not stand out in that kind of way. So I think that was probably it. So it was 2011, I decided that was the last time that I had a chemical relaxer, which a lot of Black people call perms, but perms are permanents, which usually make your hair curly. But we call them perms or relaxers. It goes back and forth. But I was wanting my hair to be stronger, I think. So I was like, I'm going to grow it out and then maybe relax it after that. But in that time period, I started to fall in love with my curls, and I also did the musical Hair, the Tribal American Rock Love musical for the first time, which was just about the young generation around the time of the draft of the Vietnam War, breaking off these societal chains and being who they are and being more natural. Like everyone was feeling that pressure that had been put on by this nuclear family society, and Black people are like, well, how do we even fit into any of that? And so there was just this rebellion, and it started with just being who you are, not having to affect your appearance in any way. And that was so freeing for me, for to both embrace and challenge, or maybe step outside of what I look like as a Black person at the same time, and a woman too, because we were also told that we couldn't groom anymore. So everywhere that grows hair was hairy all the time for the months leading up to the show, so that we would be good and hairy for the run of the show. And that was, so freeing, just to see those kind of chains released, and that they're put onto you by different reasons. People don't even know why they do have the things that they do. So I wish that there were more mindfulness around all of that, around like the way that people treat other people, for sure. I don't think I'm having an issue with people who are kind of in the middle of the road, like moderate, maybe white people who don't feel like they're a part of the problem, but they don't see the problem, and they don't know why they might have, certain biases, and don't care to look any deeper.
Yes. Couple of thoughts. One, the way that you described your biggest change was through theater, was through that show. And I think it just goes to show the importance of theater and the arts in this world.
Yes. And even within that show, there is a disparity. It was written by two white people, and they try to at the beginning of the show, all of the main characters that represent kind of different subsects of culture have a song introducing them, and the Black woman's song "Dead End" almost exclusively always gets cut. So we talk about Black women being like the bottom of the totem pole. But yes, that was definitely a turning point in my life. That being said, I'm really grateful to have done the show. I've actually done the show 3 times.
Oh my God. And I just think it's so important to do theater as a young person. Like, even if you don't pursue it, just having that option in schools and being able to see theater is really important as well, because we see so many different people's stories that we necessarily might not explore in our own lives. And even for us being in theater, being able to walk, like I said, with empathy, walk in those people's shoes and experience and learn the history. I didn't realize the power of that until I did go to AMDA. And I was, I didn't like history. I thought it was a boring class in high school. But then when I got to theater, I was like, wow, this is a person. This was a human being living in this time. This is what they were dealing with. And I think that the more that we can step into those shoes, whether it's seeing theater, being, as a form of escapism, or being in the theater and shows, the importance of the arts is crucial with understanding different perspectives.
Yeah. And to that point, as it relates to Black Lives Matter, if there's anybody who's like, where do I start? How do I fuse this theater empathy thing that we're talking about? I would say to look at August Wilson's categories. He wrote 10 plays about the Black experience in the town that he was from, and each one represents a different decade, a different time period. So yeah, I would say start there. If you don't know if you don't know what it's like, I'd say read all of those plays. They're beautifully written. And there's just so much exposure, and just truth and heartfelt blues in it that, yeah, they're amazing. Start there. August Wilson, 10 plays, categories.
I love that. I'm definitely going to explore that. And I'll put that as a resource as well down below or wherever this is going to be.
Right.
And then my other thought was when you were speaking about your mom and how she had to uphold like a certain invisible expectation within her workplace, and how the importance of these learned expectations, whether you said, it's from the perspective that you saw of your mom, because there were things that I saw in my mom and we all see in our loved ones that were like, oh, as a young person, like, is this expected of me as well? Because you find this to be so important to uphold, and these are your standards for yourself, but like, where did they get those standards of themselves? And, that she may have gotten from her mother or from society or from culture or wherever. And I think it's important to also be self-aware of like, where are we getting these standards? Where are we getting these expectations that we put on ourselves? They're not true. They're not real. They're not realistic. Not only for the Black community, but also for women body images, body sizes, what we're supposed to look like. And that's why it's so important to have diverse representation, whether it's in, the beauty industry, the wellness industry, theater. It's crucial to see that as a young person, because if we don't see that, like you said,
and the thing is, those feel like auxiliary industries. Of course, not downplaying what you or I do in entertainment and wellness or anything, but Black people don't have good representation in education, in in healthcare, in the basic necessities that you need for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There are people who don't. Of course, there are Black people who have made a lot for themselves, but there are a lot of people who are still stuck in a cycle of poverty that is very hard to get out of. And I believe it dates back to the abolition of slavery. Slaves were freed, but provisions weren't made for them. Of course, we hear about 40 acres and a mule that never came. So a lot of people worked then as indentured servants to the people who were enslaving them before. And so it was a very, very slow process to try to crawl up and make something of yourself, and then for it to be undercut at every turn through segregation and just a starving of access and resources. There was a time when if a Black person was dying and he went into a white emergency room, he would be turned away and he would have to go to another facility that was run down, and just from the amount of people that it had to care for, with probably half as much money, that person could die. And there are many stories where those people did actually pass away because they couldn't make it over to the Black hospital, or they weren't treated because so I would love to talk about representation in the entertainment industry, and and wellness and fitness, that, you know, that would be wonderful, but there are still Black women who are dying at much higher rates at childbirth
Yes.
than people. So it's like the basics. We still need representation in the basic aspects of humanity, and of course, it's not everyone. Of course, it's not a monolithic experience, but it's too many. It's too common. It's too common for it to seem like a coincidence.
And I think I didn't realize that that aspect of it until I watched the 13th, the documentary that you recommended me watching. And I know I've spoken about this on the last two calls, but it is so eye-opening for anyone who doesn't know, like, the true, honest history of our country, like not something in our history classes, not something that's in the books. Like, it is something that is not written about or spoken about enough, about how, yes, like, slavery was abolished, quote unquote abolished, but it didn't change. Like, it was just a system that was just redirected in a different way. And I think I didn't realize that. And I was like, oh, this is something that happened a long time ago. This is something that, you know, maybe people in our time period can't directly resonate with, but that's not
true. It was a legal way to dehumanize people, so that I can't speak to the original intent, but if you've dehumanized people, then you can treat them however you want. So that statute, the 13th Amendment, says that everybody's great unless you are a criminal. So right after that, Black people, Black men, especially because they were the strongest, bred to be that way, also were locked up disproportionately for anything, for made up crimes, for just walking down the street alone, or if you were doing too well, that also would try to drag you back. So that's where chain gangs came from, and that still happens today. I don't think people realize how much this economy runs now on prison labor. So it's the system is so rigged to try to keep people in prison. It's not rehabilitative at all. They're not trying to make sure that you learn your lesson. They're trying to punish you and use you, but what they don't realize is, like, why, going back to the why, you know, why a lot of people get in these situations, the desperation that poverty creates. You know, I think a lot of people who grow up seeing a life of quote unquote crime as an only option are people who are used to living hand to mouth, and are just trying to take something for themselves instead of waiting for it to be handed to them. You know,
it's just a series of oppression.
Yes, exactly. There was a time when, and I hope it still doesn't happen now, but there was a time when Black babies were given certain digits all the same in their social security number, so that it was easier to track them, so that, and then thereby you could say, oh, you know, you could tell by someone's social security number whether or not they were Black. So, you know, when you're applying for a loan or a mortgage or trying to get a job, you can easily discriminate without having to say it. The control of the Black nation is something that we've been dealing with for too long. Just getting like symbols of freedom, but the mentality is still there in a lot of hearts and minds, that people with Black skin are less human, that we've that we didn't do it right as far as evolution, or that, we were created some wrong kind of way, that we were cursed people or something like that. And that is what we've been dealing with, on a systematic level ever since.
I just recently got on a call. It was like a town hall meeting from the company called the Well Collective. They're based out of Toronto, and one of their co-founders is a Black woman with dreads who's a yoga teacher. And so I got on that call, and they had a panel of people of color, and it was such an amazing talk. But one thing that I thought of when you were speaking is there was a gentleman who spoke who was a little bit older, who works with the community and like trying to help people getting out of prison to get back on their feet. And he wishes that there were more programs like that. But he said that it is a system that is hard to get out of. It's a cycle of, it's easy to get in, but it doesn't make it very easy to get out, because they constantly want to keep you, like you said, punished for something so small, and maybe unfairly punished, and then punished for the rest of your life. And
exactly.
When you go
in
out,
the justice system, you're supposed to be able to serve your time and then live the rest of your life. And that's supposed to make it an incentive to not do it again. If you can go and you've been put on timeout and now you can live the rest of your life. And that's just not the case. People don't want to work with felons for whatever reason, but people don't want to ask you what was going on. People don't want to ask you how you have changed. None of that. And there's this mindset almost that all of us are felons in some kind of way. I was telling you, Angela Davis was quoted saying that it's more likely for a white man who's been a felon to get a job than it is for a Black man with a clean record, which means at a base level, we're starting out lower. We're starting out a step behind. We're starting out with that dehumanization already baked in. And
when you haven't even done anything wrong.
You haven't done anything. You haven't even had the chance to do anything wrong yet.
And the other thing that you mentioned about the Social Security numbers is, like he said, just the high amount of Black surveillance in this country, that you feel like you're always being watched, always being judged, always being monitored. And there was a video that I saw of, I don't know if you saw this online, but a Black child was playing basketball in his driveway, and he like saw a cop car coming, and he hid behind his car with the basketball. And then when the cop car had passed, he came out he was probably like 8. And it just goes to show, like, there are things that as a white person, we do not understand. And that is something that we will never understand when it comes to being constantly monitored, constantly surveillanced about what he is doing. And he was just playing basketball in his driveway.
Yeah, as far as the police, it does feel like the police don't work for Black people in the same way that they work for white people, as far as our tax dollars making us the people that you're supposed to protect and serve. And I don't know if that's because they assume that we make less or whatever, but everyone is taxed. That doesn't matter. That shouldn't be the case. You shouldn't be thinking like that at all. But if you consider the history of policing, which the first police battalions or whatever you want to call them were it was a slave catching organization. So something that was meant to control Black people has turned into something that is still meant to control Black people very naturally. I just learned that a few weeks ago in that as this came to light, I had a friend of mine that shared that with me, and that was really eye-opening. It, sorry,
No, you're good.
My mom called me.
You're good.
Yeah, but that just helped me understand again why this situation is the way that it is. But if we can understand that, then we can change it. So, when I think about why a police officer may be told to police Black neighborhoods more, there was a group of cops who were in the NYPD. I don't know if you saw that interview. There was like a panel of them on the news, and they were talking about how they were told to go out and quote hunt in Black neighborhoods, and any Black male from 14 to like 22, like from that, you needed to stop, you needed to watch them, you needed to see what they were doing. So
That's
so that is something that really exists, and it originated back then during slavery.
Oh my God. Mm-hmm. This is information that we all need, and we all need to understand, like you said, the why behind the way that our country is the way that it is. And, there is a lot of passion happening at the moment around this movement. And some white people are like, why is there so much anger and so much passion? And I think people need to understand, me included, in the beginning, as I was like, I don't understand as to like why there's white supremacy. I don't understand why people feel this way, why they can't just connect with people on a human level. And it's because of all of this history and all of this information that obviously we're not taught. Mm-hmm. It is something that has been kind of brushed under the rug for so many years. And we need to know it. We need to learn it, and people need to be aware of it.
Mm-hmm. I do. And I think people just need to be more involved in what's happening in their communities. This country is way too big to look solely to federal leadership for any kind of change. And a lot of Black people are distrustful in that in general, because those systems have wronged them. Mm-hmm. I think it was like the first Black federal banking system that was supposed to be backed by the government ended up not, and they took all that money, so it's like we have to look at what we have around each other, and look at these local officials, see what's going on, go to your zoning meetings, go to your neighborhood association meetings, mm-hmm. Take back the democratic process for yourself, because a lot of Black people here are citizens, and that's what we need to be treated as, not criminals unless you feel like coming around to seeing what I'm about. Because I don't imagine that everybody's minds and hearts are going to change right now. This is something that has been deeply baked into the fabric of who a lot of people are. But the disrespect has risen since this administration started, and the shame has decreased. I wasn't surprised to see all this racist rhetoric that started during Donald Trump's first campaign, because like I said, it was flown down the street from my house when I grew up as a little girl. So I wasn't surprised that it was there, but that man was never like shouting at me as I walked down the street. And I feel like that's something that's more likely to happen now. Like more violence is being incited. And that's why we're at this enough is enough kind of place, because it's just the same story over and over and over and over and again. With George Floyd's death, him repeating those words, "I cannot breathe," and also to watch the video and see him comply. A lot of people think if you just comply, if you just do what you're supposed to do, if you just live the right kind of life, then these things won't happen. The police won't treat you that way. No, that's not true. They don't say like, oh, if you've got a Lululemon jacket on, or if you've got a suit, don't stop that man. No, that's not what they're told. They're told if you're Black, then there's probably something to be suspicious about, which is, it's wild.
Crazy. When you talked about this administration, it made me think about, again, the word representation. Like, what are we seeing as someone who is representing the people and representing our country? And of course, like, these people that have had this hatred bottled up and in this society have been shown that, like, it's not okay. But then there's someone that jumps into a leadership position that shows you, like, oh, you know, it's okay to be yourself, even if you shame other people, even if you have hatred for other people, it's okay. And he showed that on a, you know, national level. And I think that's why, I mean, in my opinion, that's why there were so many people that came out of the gutters that have all this hatred now, because it was represented to the people that that behavior was acceptable.
I hope and pray that we are at a rock bottom place right now where we can, you know, a lot of ugliness has been unearthed, and so that hopefully we can deal with it and it won't get any worse. But it would be wonderful if we could have been united in some kind of way, because I feel like the country has always been, we've had this, like, I don't know what, like a thin tether between, you know, so much of people being liberal and so much people being conservative and stuff like that. But there's always been something that has been keeping us united. And this administration is, like, just hacking away at that tether, at that adjoinment. And it's scary. Barack Obama led a live event maybe about two or 2.5 weeks after all of the protests and everything erupted, and he spoke, and then he gave other leaders of the movement and community activists a time to speak and answer questions. And he also had his old attorney general there speaking too. But I'm telling you, Gina, it was the first time I had exhaled in 2.5 weeks, because there was someone saying, it's going to be okay. America is better than this. There are people on both sides who want the change as well, you know. And you would think that that wouldn't be so hard, but nothing surprises me anymore.
Because, I mean, when you see what's happening and the leadership and how they're handling these situations, it's really hard to trust and be hopeful. And I think that maybe when you heard him speak, it was like a sense of, like, relief and hope that there is someone in, you know, he is still a leader as this, you know, as a former president.
He also instilled in us that we are the leaders now. Like, we can take up the mantle. We can do what we can to move the needle forward.
And that it will make a difference. Absolutely.
Like, just little by little, bit by bit, conversation by conversation, vote by vote. There's been so much voter suppression. If we're talking about another system of oppression, it absolutely happens. And what was it? There was, when Obama got elected, there was this secret meeting, this closed doors meeting that someone leaked some footage from, and there was a man talking about how to make Obama a one-term president, instead of talking about how to do any good, how to, like, work with, you know, that's voter suppression is a big thing. In my opinion, you should be registered to vote when you turn 18 if you are a citizen. If it is your right that everyone should vote, then you should not have to register to do it. Because that's one way that you control the numbers, by whether or not someone is registered. You know, and corralling certain people to certain polls so that they'll be overrun and have more problems. These things these things happen, you know. You should also be able to vote anywhere. There should be a database, you know, that it says like where you are, where you live on your ballot. So okay, they should go into that system. It should be counted like that. But I have said it before and I'll say it again. If you have to move the goalpost in order to win, you don't deserve to win. And that's okay. That's the game, you know? Come back and try again, try another strategy. But it has been this sick and twisted game to like how for people to remain, I don't know, in power or control. I just think there's enough resources, there's enough space on this planet for everyone to live a dignified life. And living hand to mouth is not a dignified life. You know, being seen as less than is not a respectful, dignified life.
Yes.
And that's what we have to root. That's what we have to root out. That's what we have to make people understand, that, you know, and the life is just not as worth living if we can't fight for those things.
Absolutely. No, I totally agree. I have one more question. What advice do you have? And I asked the other girls this too. What advice do you have for the white communities, the Black communities, and for all of humanity?
Let's see. For white communities, something about ancestral trauma is coming to mind. I think that a lot of people now, because they're far removed from the situation, we are far removed from the abolition of slavery. Although I heard a story that there were a group of slaves who were being held all the way until the 1960s in Louisiana, just because the land ran on from, you know, it was a very rural place, so they weren't told they didn't have any access to know that people had been freed for over 100 years.
Insane.
I'm telling you, it's in Louisiana. Look it up. But so it's not that far away, but that kind of shame and degradation and hurt and pain is something that I feel like has been passed down through generations of Black people. We feel for those who came before us, and we're so grateful for those who endured the chastisement, the brutality, the sex crimes against them. But I don't think I think maybe it's hard for a white person to think about, oh, I need to make up for the pain that my ancestors caused, because I'm not actively causing it, but I am a descendant of that, and I have certain privileges and benefits because of that, because of how other people suffered. That's why it's important for white people to also take up the mantle and just just keep coming to acceptance. When I think about Germany and how they've progressed as a nation after all the crimes that happened against the nation of Judea, there was acceptance. Of course, it was on a world stage, and they had to say we messed up and move forward. But I don't think that there was like one letter written saying sorry, Black people, but there hasn't been like a real recognition and acceptance of the hurt and the legacy of the hurt that is still around. So I ask white people to do whatever they can to deal with that, to understand that we have all been interconnected on this journey here in America. And so you can't separate yourself from our experience, because your experience wouldn't be what it is if ours wasn't what it was.
That's so good.
For people of color, I would say just keep pressing and keep leading with love. And now is the time to figure out what it is that we need, aside from for people to stop pushing us down and kicking us. What is the kind of life that we do want to lead? How does that look? How do we move forward? And how do we move forward in a way that's not more of the same? I caution people from trying to replace a white male patriarchal system with a black male patriarchal system. How can we really get to a place of equality and understanding and acceptance of everybody, where a place where everybody can flourish? So that's what I hope that we can look toward. And who else am I giving advice to? Humanity as a...
Humanity. All the world.
All the world. All the world. I asked all the world to check their privilege, because this is happening all over the place. People who are darker are being discriminated against in every corner of the world. And it's just silly. It's just nonsense, It's just they're flukes, It's just genetically recessive traits that happen as people migrated around the world. It's nothing to crux your identity on. I know that's hard, because we as humans don't know what we're doing here, so we're trying to make the most of it and hold on to our experience being something, but your experience is precious because you are experiencing it. So you don't have to put all this value on something that you had nothing to do with. None of us picked any of this. So yeah, that's what I say to the world. Look at yourselves too, and how you're treating your darker skinned people, how you're treating your indigenous people, because there's probably some work to do there too.
I love what you said, that last statement. Just like, we all as human beings don't know what the hell we're doing here, and we're all on this journey together, and we're trying to make the best of it. I just love that so much, because it puts what's happening in the world into a real perspective in that way, where it's just what are we doing? What are we doing? It's so much bigger than this.
It could be, why are we grappling with, a Game of Thrones still, when life is so short? It is people are trying to amass stuff for what? Because we have no idea if any of that is going to mean anything. But I think the connections that you sow into other people, the love that you put into the world, that's what means something.
Girl, I loved talking to you today.
Yeah, me too. This is great.
I felt like it was just such an honest conversation, and just so authentic, and we touched on so many different elements of oppression and this movement. So I'm incredibly grateful to you.
Yeah, I know. I was a little all over the place. So many scattered topics to go back and research. I feel like if people haven't heard of things, but there's so many levels to this thing, and so I've even been learning so much in the past month, and doing more for me and myself and my family, what I can, because it's everybody's issue.
Yeah. Then it starts in the home. It starts with you, and then your home, and then in your community in the world. So
I'm starting with the man in the mirror.
Oh, I love that song.
Exactly.
We loved having you, Kristen. I'm so grateful for you.
Thank you, Gina Bina.
Thank you so much, guys, for listening to this episode. I'm so grateful for you, as well as Kristen and all the other women that I spoke to during this series. If you liked it, please like this video / audio and subscribe to this channel, because I'll be creating more authentic, raw content for you in the future, and I cannot wait to do that. This was an amazing opportunity for me to be able to discuss this topic with these women. There's 2 other videos. If you haven't listened / watched them yet, I encourage you to do that. It was just a great perspective that I encourage everyone to listen to get insight into this movement. And I'm very grateful that they were able to share it with us. So if you liked it, please respond in the comments or like this video, and follow these women on social media if you wish. And hopefully we can have more conversations like this in the future.